Good day, lovely people. It's Professor Matt, and welcome again to the Too Many Guys Soccer Show, and welcome back to for another Eastern Europe report. It's been a bit since I've done one of these, but when you are, I'm going to use a old Soviet term, working intelligentsia, right, a working academic, right, you have to do things like grade midterms and, teach classes. So, this is the first one I think I've recorded since September. Yeah, I think it was the first of the autumn international breaks. And so it's that time again. And right, we're going to cover the two spring to autumn leagues that we follow on the pod, Kazakhstan and Belarus, because they have wrapped up. So we know what is what, who's going to Europe, and right. Uh, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Ukrainian league. They still have 3 match days left, but then the winter break, it cometh. So, right, the Ukrainian league, it's almost like 2 seasons within a season, right? Because the winter break's 2 months long and squads can look very different. Right. So nothing is set in stone, but we'll examine the top of the league table. We'll also talk a little bit about potential January transfers, right? Because a lot of the Eastern European clubs, particularly the teams that are either on the spring through autumn calendar or have this long winter break, they do a lot of business in January, guys. January is extra, extra important in this part of the world. So let's get it started, and let's get it started with Kazakhstan. So the Kazakh League wrapped up last week, which is weird because you would think they would have had their last match day prior to the, international break. But look, well, we don't need 3 international breaks in the fall. I'm just going to throw that out there now. But anyway, the league has wrapped, and Kairat Almaty, which is the sort of unofficial Kazakh club of the podcast, they won the league for the first time in a decade, which was really cool. So they finished on 47 points, and that guarantees them, at the very least, Europa League football, right? Because they're going to be put into the Champions League playoff, but they're going to enter at that point where, regardless of what happens, they're at least going to get Europa League stage. Right. So they finished on 47. We had a title race down the end, which is really cool. Astana, who dominated the league for decades, right? And it is Asta. The city is called Nur Sultan, but the club is, for whatever reason, still Astana, which I guess is kind of cool, right? It's not like, yeah, Kazakhstan dictatorship much, but it's not as crazy as, let's say, Turkmenistan, where there is actually a club called FC Turkmenbashi, right? The name of the, wow, 3 times ago, dictator guys. So Astana finished in second on 46 points, which does guarantee them, at the very least, Europa League football. So, that second spot's pretty important. And then third and fourth, which it's Europa League playoffs. It's, maybe Conference League. Kobe at 43 and Ordobashi, last year's champions, at 42. What was the big difference in the Kazakh League this year? Right, because Kairat scored the most goals of any team in the league last season, and they were like fun to watch, and they were fun to watch this season too. Uh, but I think I said last year when I was talking about them, they reminded me of early Klopp Liverpool, like before we got Van Dijk, before we got Allison. It was just press, 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 but the defense, it be leaky. Like you have to score 4 or 5 goals because the defense was going to let in at least two. Uh, this season it was night and day, and it was two defensive additions, both from former RPL, so former Russian Premier League players. One is 35, I think he's 36 actually, Alexander Martinovich, who in his day was he's Belarusian. In his day was a pretty goddamn good center back. He could also play right back as well. He's not that guy anymore, but having, that veteran sort of presence and give solidity to that back line did a world of good. And then, really, maybe the transfer of the year in Kazakhstan, young Igor Sorokin, Russian international, though he hasn't been called up for a long time, but he made a lot of appearances for the under 21s. About 6 years ago, he was the hot going to be, and he's only 24, but he was going to be the hot new thing in Russian football, the next great Russian center back. And right, he's a byproduct of the Krasnodar Academy that gave us the likes of Matvey Savanov, who's at PSG right now. Uh, Injuries and managerial changes have totally derailed his career trajectory. But he was one of those Russians that got out. Like his contract expired, and there really wasn't a market for him in, certainly Western Europe. So he's like, no, I'm gonna go to Kazakhstan. I'm gonna prove myself, and he was terrific. And he's still silly young. He's a guy who I think he should stay in Kazakhstan for at least a season, right? And see if he can, continue with this good form. But he's a guy who he will never play for a big club. I don't think he's ever going to reach the potential, the lofty potential that a lot of us saw in him. But he could probably play. The talent's there. He could play for a mid-table Italian or German team, or a Spanish team. And right, so the defense, the defensive revolution, ultimately proved the day because look, they still scored a lot of goals, but they conceded far less. I was talking about Sorokin. One other player from this Kairat squad that I think might make a move someplace. And if I had to guess, I'd say probably Turkey. There's like a weird contingent of Kazakh players in the Turkish Super League at the moment. Uh, the player in question is Adildit Suabekov, 20-year-old central midfielder. I'm not certain exactly what his best position is. He's one of those guys who can play 6, 8, 10. You can even play him out wide if you're really desperate. He's 22. He's plays well above his years, and he has a good footballing IQ. He came up to the senior squad last year. Didn't play all that much, was essentially used as a sub. But this year cemented his starting position, and he was a revelation. He arguably, other than the two, additions at center back, he was probably Kairat's best player. And he got a run in with the Kazakh national team over this last international break. So he's a guy to watch out for. Sadibekov. So that's Kazakhstan. What about Belarus? So Belarus, technically this, and by the way, I'm recording this the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. So this is Tuesday the 26th. Right. And I don't know when you're going to be hearing me, but hopefully, whenever you hear me, this next upcoming Sunday is the final match day for the Belarusian league. But here's the thing: the top three, which are the European spots, have already been determined. Dynamo Minsk, and I called this, won the league just yesterday, Monday, by beating Gomel 1-0. And so they topped the league at 67 points. Not nearly as dominating a title run as last season, but they defended their title. And right, they regardless of what happens this Sunday, they're at least going to top the table on 3 points. Excuse me, on 1 point because they had a match in hand, hence the match that was played on Monday. Right. And then second and third are pretty much now determined, right? And so Minsk, similar to Kairat, they're at least guaranteed Europa League football. They might wind up in the Champions League if they can, depending on what they do in the playoffs. But then in second, it was Neman Gorodino, who really came out of nowhere. They've been in the league for a while, but last season I think they finished like mid-table. And then Torpedo Bellas that are increasingly every year just getting slightly better since they came up a couple of years ago. And so those are the, Europa League and Conference League spots. Uh, The biggest surprise in the Belarus League, I don't have anyone who I think can, go to the West. Right? A lot of the younger players on that Dynamo men's team, like Morozov, already made the move last summer. Right? But the biggest surprise was who got relegated. Shakhtar Soligorsk, who were the champions just 2 years ago, 2022. Uh, and they weren't just champions, they dominated the league. I think the league was wrapped up well before Halloween that year. They got relegated and they were terrible. I mean, they were terrible. And it's not like there's been some player movement, right? It's not the same squad as it was 2 years ago, but the core of that squad is still there, and it's sort of inexplicable how bad they were. Now they had some injuries earlier in the season, but nothing that could possibly derail you as bad as they were. I mean, they finished on 9 points, guys. That's bad. Uh, so that was surprising. The UPL, the Ukrainian League. Right. And like I said, we are 3 match days away from the long winter hibernation. Uh, and things are things are looking really good for my boys. Dynamo Kiev, top the table on 35 points. And right, I'll talk a little bit about why they've been so good. Uh, in second is Alexandria at 33 points. So, there's a title race here. Uh, and then there's Shakhtar, the defending champions, in third at 29. What do we make of these three clubs, right? So for Dinamo, and I said this at the beginning of the season, I said there's a legitimate chance they can win the league. And I think I picked them to win the league. And that was as much with this than it was, the quote unquote, if I can borrow a quote from our director of football, the Dinamo Serce, the heart. Uh, this is a really talented team, and it's like the best mixture of like old guys, like Yarmolenko's there and he's doing well. Vitaly Bykowski, it sucks. Like he probably should have went to the West like 6 years ago, but he's fine. And Bushchen, while he shouldn't be Ukraine's number one keeper, I think that's obvious at this point. He's still a pretty good goalkeeper. The mix of old guys, but the youth men, the guys who were bludgeoned in, particularly last year, guys like Vladimir Brozhako, right, Timchuk, who actually, is now a regular in the national team, and Vladislav Vanat, who Jobic's having an okay season in Italy, but I think there's a case that Fanon should be leading the line for Ukraine at the moment. They've all showed up. They've all showed up. And right, for my money, Brajako, who's, our six, he might be player of the season for the league. He's been outstanding, which is great for Dynamo because that's been a gaping hole for a while in this squad. And it's good for Ukraine because Taras Stepanenko is an old ass man. He's like 3 years younger than me. So he has to get cycled out. And this dude's legit. And this dude's going to be playing someplace else. I don't think he should leave Ukraine now. Right. I think, stay in the league for a year or two. Because he's young. He's 22, but like he's gonna go someplace else. Shakhtar. We'll skip Alexandria for a second because they're a very interesting, weird story. Uh, I don't know what Shakhtar is. They are Jekyll and Hyde. They either beat down a team like six. I think they pumped Chernomorets Odessa. It was either this past week or right before the international break, like 6-1, or they get pumped. They lose. It's been a weird season for them, and they've conceded a lot of goals. And I saw this coming, right? Because Rakititsky is gone, and even though he wasn't the same guy he was in his prime, the veteran leadership in that back line, he held that defense together. And it's clear that they're missing his defense, the defensive leadership. And right, back to Star Stepanenko, he was always at the heart of that midfield, breaking up play, retaining possession, you know, breaking Yarmolenko's knees, if you remember that, back in was that even the late odds, early teens, I want to say, like 2012 or something, because Yarmolenko almost missed the Euros. That's right. So he's he barely plays, and his replacement hasn't really caught on. So like they're a weird team. Are they out of it? No, I'm never gonna write them out until they're dead. Because there's enough guys in this squad that have won this league and won this league multiple times. But things are looking weird for them, and they haven't really impressed that much in Europe. I mean, they've been okay, but there's something amiss there, and I really think it's a loss of veteran leadership. And I also think because there is one really standout player in this squad. And look, there's been rumors about him. I'll talk about him in a few minutes, moving to Western Europe now. It seems like the last 2 years. And I think that started, I genuinely believe that's actually a distraction. It's kind of like Tottenham the last season that Harry Kane was there, because everyone knew he was going to leave. And just the speculation of it, I think, got to the team. I think it got to the dressing room. I think there's something very similar going on in Shakhtar. Uh, what about the second place team, Alexandria, who's one of my favorite weird ass clubs in Ukraine? Because if you actually go to the Wikipedia site and look at their whole name, it's a lot longer than just Alexandria. They were a club of Soviet vintage, never played in the Soviet Vysshaya League or the Premier League, but I think they got to effectively what is the equivalent of the first division, so like the second tier. They were founded around a factory that made medical equipment. So like the actual name is something like radiology, technical Alexandria. It's this crazy long name, right? Because the club used to be owned by a company that made fuck X-ray machines. Uh, and they're fun. They came up about 6 or 7 seasons ago, and they got to the Europa League, guys, not all that long ago, and they're a really well-run club. Excellent, scouting, excellent, academy. But last year they really hit the skids, and they came yay close to getting relegated. They were lucky to stay up. Uh, However, it's one of those take a step back, take 2 steps forward things. A lot of the reasons why they weren't very good last year was a lot of the players that they had cycled in, were in the squad when they were playing European football, got cycled out and replaced by some of these younger players who now have a season of professional football under their belt. They also, going back to a previous story on this podcast, uh, they were the biggest beneficiaries of Dnipro's demise. And yeah, it was right before it might have been right before the season started, actually, the last time I did this. Dnipro obviously doesn't exist anymore. They are done. And right, their squad was picked apart, but Alexandria got some pretty important players, including, for my money, the best goalkeeper in the league this year, 22-year-old Jorge Yoram Karov, who probably, not this year, but maybe next summer, or maybe, next January, will be playing someplace. Well, some Western European team will bring him in to be their third or second, maybe even second choice goalkeeper. He's been outstanding. 7 clean sheets on the season. And the thing is, their defense isn't all that great. He gets peppered a bit. Right. And he pulls off some really good saves. He's also very, very good. And this is a hallmark of a modern keeper, for better or for worse. He's very good in terms of possession and with the ball at his feet. His distribution's really good. This is a guy to watch. Jorge Yarmakarov. Uh, the other thing, or the other, big addition from Dnipro was former Dnipro captain. He was the captain of that Dnipro scheme that got to the Europa League final, only to lose to Sevilla back in 2015. He played for Dynamo Kiev briefly as well, and he was an assistant manager under Shevchenko with the national team. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Ruslan Roatan. And they appointed him manager, geez, like 2 weeks before the season started. And at first I was like, that's kind of weird because Rotan was I believe he was director of football at Dnipro. Right. So it was like, okay, that's a kind of a strange hire, but okay. He's been for my money, he's the manager of the season. He is my manager of the season candidate because what he's doing with this squad is remarkable. Right, because I saw them getting better. I thought they'd be safe and, clearly safe, but I did not expect them in the, European spots. So, hey, that's it. We have a title race on our hands, and we have a team which we didn't necessarily expect to be there in Alexandria. So before I call it a short, two names, two players that potentially I can see, because remember I said January for all of these clubs, regardless of whether you're on the winter break or whether you're on the spring autumn thing. The January transfer window is huge for Eastern European clubs, and that's not just incomings, also outgoing. It's outgoings, right? Uh, Jorge Sudakov, the attacking midfielder slash creative eight for Shakhtar Donetsk. Uh, Look, he's being rumored to go everywhere, and I think he's going to get a move. It's probably going to be England, where I don't know. I mean, I've heard Man City because apparently there are people in cities set up that think he could potentially be a Kevin De Bruyne replacement, and I don't think that's a crazy shout. I don't think he's Kevin De Bruyne now, but the talent's there where he could do a pretty good impersonation in 2 years. Right. I don't think that's a crazy shout. And they're gonna need reinforcements, right? So, I've heard Arsenal, and that makes a crap ton of sense to me, maybe even more so than City. Because look, we saw what happens to Arsenal when Odegaard isn't there. It's bad. Like they're not a particularly creative team without him in the midfield. Uh right. So I think Sadakov as, a high-end Odegaard cover would just make a lot of sense. A lot of sense. I've also heard Newcastle, although there's still some questions about where they are financially. Right. I've also heard Chelsea, but everyone is linked with Chelsea, so I don't know. That wouldn't really make sense to me unless maybe Chelsea are done with Enzo Fernandez, but Enzo's looked good over the last month, so like that doesn't make very much sense to me. But anyway, I think he's going to move, and I do think he probably winds up in England. Those are where the strongest links are, and right, he's going to go for bank, and that's the other thing too. Like if Shakhtar move him in January, they might be able to salvage their season and their title chances because they're going to take that money they get and they're going to reinvest it right back into the squad. We know how they roll. So, that Sudakov is obviously a name to watch out for in January. And here's one you've probably never heard of. So, going back to Dnipro and its demise, Alexandria was not the only club to benefit from that. Polizia, they signed a player that I've always been a fan of. And I was actually kind of surprised to see he was 24. And I think this helps his case in terms of getting a move to the West. Uh, Left wing, wing forward, Alexander Nazarenko. And if that name sounds familiar, he is indeed related to the Nazarenko who played in the midfield for geez, it seemed like everybody. Dynamo, Shakhtar, Chernomorets Odessa, and obviously the Ukrainian national team. But he's not a defensive midfielder. He is a goal scoring, winger. And right, he is at the moment tied with Andrei Bondarenko, which is another reason why I think Shakhtar will sell Sudakov. They have the replacement in-house, right? He is tied for the Golden Boot at the moment with Bondarenko with 7 goals. He's been very good, and he was a big part of why Dnipro were so good just 2 years ago. Kid is fast. His technique. There's some work to be done in terms of his technique, but the talent's there. The footballing IQ is there. And unlike another Ukrainian left winger who went west for a lot of money, who is all about Jesus, he's only about Jesus, only Jesus. Mr. Mudryk, he is a way more accomplished finisher. Right, because that was my biggest critique of Mudryk's game. It was like, yeah, he's scoring more goals now, but he can do everything. He's not the most clinical. Nazarenko's clinical. And is he going to get a big money move? Is he going to wind up in the Premier League or La Liga? Probably not. Maybe La Liga. But there are offers, there are rumors that there are going to be offers from Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And I think any of those options at this juncture in his career probably wouldn't be a bad thing, especially because look, once you get past Modric, particularly on the Ukrainian national team, you could put Tashankov there, you can put Zubak there, but they're both right-sided players. Them out left looks awkward as shit. And I guess you could even put Yaremchuk there, but that's kind of goofy too. And right, that worked more when he was a young buck, not so much now. There's a place screaming for backup left wing forward, and he could be the guy. So, a move to even like, an Ajax or a Feyenoord or, a Ghent or even, a mid-table Bundesliga team, or maybe not even a mid-table team, right? Uh, I think that would do him a world of good, and he's a really nice player. So, this is Professor Matt, and this was our usual Eastern European sit down. And right, end of the season in some leagues edition, pre-winter break, January transfer window edition for Ukraine. And right, my hope is maybe in the end of January, early February, I'll get back and record another one of these talking about uh, transfer business and my predictions for, the second half of the Ukrainian league and the start, right? Because Belarus and Kazakhstan start back up in March uh, of their respective leagues. So, I'm thinking February, maybe. I don't know. But I'll be back. You can get that. You can take that to the bank. Anyway, gang. This is Professor Matt. This is Two Men Guys Soccer Show. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Peace.